Imagine this. You wake up one morning and the world feels smaller. Not just your room or your city or your routine, but everything. The conversations feel shallow. The ambitions feel borrowed. The laughter rehearsed. Even the beauty around you, the sunsets, the songs, the shimmering faces, begins to feel like echoes of something you once found meaningful. It's not depression, not exactly. You can still move, still function, still pretend. But something within you has shifted. But grow in consciousness, in self-awareness, in moral disobedience. That is dangerous. The hidden problem begins early, not with malice, but with design. From childhood, you are shaped to be a participant in a world built for utility, not authenticity. School rewards memorization over imagination. Social acceptance requires compliance over conviction. Even love, in many families, is conditional, granted in exchange for being good, for not making waves, for staying within the approved script. You are not asked what you feel. You are told what you should be. Carl Jung called this the development of the persona, a mask we create to function in society. It's useful, even necessary. But over time, we forget it's a mask. We confuse it for who we are. And the soul, the deep self that exists beneath performance, gets buried under layers of roles, expectations, and false smiles. The problem? The soul never forgets. You can keep it quiet for a time, distract it with success, seduce it with comfort, silence it with fear. But eventually, it begins to press against the surface. It stirs in the quiet. It aches when you're alone. It shows up in your dreams, your exhaustion, your quiet dissatisfaction that has no clear source. That's not weakness. That's the truth asking to be remembered. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what if you were never allowed to find your why? What if your how has always been inherited, passed down from people too afraid to ask deeper questions themselves? Society's structures are not neutral. They are psychological enclosures, shaping perception as much as behavior. Arthur Schopenhauer argued that most people mistake the limits of their mind for the limits of the world. When you live long enough inside the cage, you forget it's a cage at all. And when someone begins to rattle the bars, through questioning, through pain, through refusal, they are labeled as lost, broken, unstable. But what if they're simply waking up? Jean-Paul Sartre believed that freedom is a curse as much as a gift. "We are condemned to be free," he wrote, "because once we become aware of our freedom, we can no longer hide behind excuses. And that's where the real terror begins. Once your soul starts expanding, you can no longer pretend. You can no longer comfortably blame society, your parents, or your past. You have to become. But become what? This is where the psyche resists. It throws up distractions, rationalizations, even psychosomatic symptoms to protect you from the vastness of yourself. You may feel chronic fatigue, anxiety, or depression, not because you are broken, but because your soul is wrestling with its own confinement. You are trying to live a transcendent life inside a transactional world. That friction has a cost. Aldous Huxley, in The Doors of Perception, pointed out that the brain is not just an instrument for awareness, but a filter, reducing raw experience down to manageable proportions so we don't become overwhelmed. Culture does something similar. It narrows human experience into digestible norms. But when the soul begins to outgrow that narrowing, when perception begins to re-expand, it can feel like madness. You begin to question everything: religion, career, identity, even love. Not because you've become cynical, but because your soul can no longer settle for half-truths. You don't want more answers. You want better questions. You don't want more possessions. You want meaning. And this makes you a threat. Because the world is held together not by truth, but by consensus. And when you break from consensus, you destabilize the illusion. That is why people resist those who change, not because they hate you, but because your awakening challenges their sleep. Viktor Frankl, who endured Auschwitz, wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." Look around. How many people are truly alive, and how many are simply numbing themselves into forgetfulness? When your soul begins to grow beyond what the world has given you, it's not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. But the world has no framework for this. Therapists might diagnose you. Friends might worry about you. Employers might fire you. Families might scold you because you are no longer playing the role assigned. You are becoming real. And real things, raw, vulnerable, luminous, are rare in a world obsessed with control. This is not an easy path. The moment you allow yourself to expand beyond the inherited mold, you enter the wilderness. The maps stop working. The voices that once guided you become incoherent. There is no catastrophe to explain it, no sudden heartbreak or death. Only this quiet, disorienting truth. The world no longer fits. Not because it shrank, but because you grew. You try to go about your day. You nod at people who seem content. You scroll through images of curated joy, mimic rituals of success, repeat words that once carried conviction. But beneath it all, there's a trembling tension. You're outgrowing the stories you were told to believe in. Even your own thoughts may turn against you for a while. But here's the truth. This chaos is sacred. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole, of reconciling the shadow and the self. And it begins with the collapse of everything false. You are not broken. You are in transition. You are not lost. You are unlearning the directions that led you away from yourself. You are not behind. You are breaking free from a race you never agreed to run. This is what happens when the soul begins to remember its true size. And it is only the beginning. It doesn't happen all at once. The damage is quiet, polite. It wears a smile and speaks the language of normalcy. The soul begins to suffocate, not in fire, but in subtle compromises, in conversations you no longer believe in days that feel like photocopies of a life you never chose. And the worst part? You almost get used to it. The world teaches you how to endure, but not how to expand. So when your soul starts growing beyond its old frame, the consequences don't appear as lightning strikes or collapsing buildings. They arrive like symptoms: the growing numbness, the disinterest in what once thrilled you, the strange grief for something that hasn't happened yet. You laugh less. You fake more. You find yourself both hungry and full, starving for meaning, yet overwhelmed by too much of everything that isn't. This is what happens when the soul outgrows the world and tries to keep living inside it anyway. At first, you think something's wrong with you. You question your gratitude, your work ethic, your capacity for joy. You blame your attention span, your diet, your schedule. But the truth is more subversive. The architecture of the modern world is not built to nourish the soul. It is built to occupy the mind, to exhaust the body, to distract the spirit just enough that you forget what you came here to do. We live in a culture of optimization, of endless self-improvement. But you were never meant to be a project. You were meant to be a presence. The brain adapts quickly. It learns what is rewarded, what is acceptable, what is safe. But the soul, deep, primal, ungovernable, rejects that game. It rebels in whispers. It sabotages your carefully planned future by asking the one question no one wants to hear: is this all? And once asked, that question doesn't go away. It echoes. It fractures your relationships, your routines, even your sense of time. Things that once seemed urgent, emails, titles, milestones, now feel like illusions. You start to notice the rituals of avoidance around you. The endless scrolling, the frantic productivity, the obsession with appearance, the addiction to novelty. These aren't just personal habits. They are cultural symptoms, manifestations of a soul-starved civilization. You watch people chase vacations, promotions, spiritual retreats, not because they're lost, but because they sense the emptiness beneath the surface and don't know how to name it. Here's the thing no one tells you. When the soul begins to expand, it drags your entire life into review. You start seeing through things, smiling faces that conceal despair, noble causes built on ego, traditions upheld by fear. It's not cynicism, it's clarity. But clarity is a heavy gift. It costs comfort, certainty, community. You might lose people, you might lose yourself, at least the version that played along. Psychologically, this is the point of rupture. Your old identity begins to disintegrate. Neurologically, the brain starts seeking new patterns, but without familiar anchors, it goes into panic. This is why growth often feels like crisis. You're not falling apart. You're falling through the lie. Cognitive dissonance becomes a daily companion. You want to belong, but you can't unsee what you've seen. You want to play along, but the script no longer fits. And so, you linger at the threshold, too awake to return, too unsure to proceed. This liminal space, the space between who you were and who you are becoming, is where most people get stuck. Why? Because the world rewards fitting in. It does not reward awakening. When you grow too fast, too deep, you become a mirror. And people hate what they see in mirrors, not because of you, but because you remind them of everything they've buried. Their unlived lives, their abandoned truths, their forgotten questions. You might hear things like, "You've changed. You're too intense. Why can't you just be happy?" But what they mean is, "Please stop making me feel what I've tried so hard to suppress." This is why so many return to the comfort of the known. They silence their expansion for the sake of acceptance. The world's vocabulary no longer holds your truth. You are bursting at the seams of a reality too small for your soul. You start to wonder, is this what insanity feels like? To see too much, feel too much, want something too large to be named? Or is this clarity, something so rare and immense that no one dares to speak of it? You look at others. Most seem absorbed, hypnotized, perhaps comforted by the very limits that now suffocate you. They shrink back into old versions of themselves, manageable, predictable, safe. But the consequences don't vanish. They simply go underground. In suppressed souls, the consequences mutate into chronic anxiety that no therapy seems to fix, into burnout that persists even during rest, into relationships that feel more like performances than intimacy, into dreams of escape, new cities, new jobs, new people, but the same ache. This ache is not random. It is the memory of your vastness, and it will not leave you alone. Culturally, we've normalized soul suppression. We call it maturity, responsibility, being realistic. But realism, in this context, is just a euphemism for fear, and fear has become a virtue. We admire those who endure, not those who evolve. We reward those who stay in place, not those who risk the unknown. But the consequences of a life unlived are devastating. They may not show up in headlines, but they echo in addiction, distraction, apathy, disease. Gabor Mate writes that when the body says no, it's often the soul's last attempt to speak through the flesh. Trauma, in this view, is not just what happened to you. It's what didn't happen when your truth was silenced. So here you are, standing at the edge of the known world, trembling not because you are weak, but because you are finally strong enough to stop pretending. This is the cost of expansion. You must leave behind not just comfort, but recognition. Not just safety, but certainty. And yet, something in you knows there is no going back. The consequences of living a lie are worse than the consequences of stepping into the unknown. And the soul, ancient, relentless, luminous, refuses to settle. It will whisper through your fatigue. It will cry out in your joyless victories. It will haunt your silent moments. It will remind you, over and over, that there is something more. And maybe, just maybe, the pain you feel is not a flaw, but a doorway. It begins with refusal, not the loud, theatrical kind that makes headlines, but the quiet kind, the personal kind, the kind of refusal that starts in the body. You stop laughing at things you don't find funny. You stop forcing conversations that drain your spirit. You stop agreeing with truths that no longer fit. This is rebellion, not against the world, but against the version of you the world has groomed to be obedient. And that is the most dangerous rebellion of all. Most revolutions are external. Marches, manifestos, broken windows, and raised fists. But the soul's rebellion? It's internal, invisible. It happens in the silence between breaths, when you catch yourself about to perform, about to obey, about to comply, and instead, you choose not to. That single moment, that microscopic pause in the machinery of your conditioning, is the beginning of your liberation. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like fear, like betrayal, like standing at the edge of the forest, knowing everything familiar is behind you, and still you take a step forward. You choose the wilderness over the script. You risk isolation for authenticity. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." This is not about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming your authorship over the future. The rebellion begins the moment you realize you are not obligated to be the person the world believes you to be. You don't have to keep performing the role you were cast in. You don't have to keep chasing goals that no longer make your heart beat faster. You don't have to keep loving the idea of a life you secretly dread waking up to. You are allowed to change the story, even if that means burning the script. But how? How do you break free when everything around you is designed to keep you in place? First, you stop asking for permission. The soul does not need approval to expand. You were taught to wait for signs, for confirmation, for applause. But the truth is, those things rarely arrive before the leap. The world does not encourage awakening. It resists it. Because your transformation disrupts the equilibrium, your refusal reveals the prison. Your joy exposes their numbness. You do not need a plan. You need a decision. The decision to no longer abandon yourself. That's the moment it changes. Not when you quit the job or leave the relationship or sell your things. That may come later. But the real rebellion begins the moment you turn inward and whisper, "I will no longer betray my soul for belonging." Carl Jung warned that individuation, the path to wholeness, requires confrontation with the unconscious. That means facing your shadow, your trauma, your repressed truths. Not to fix them, but to integrate them. To become whole, not pure. This is not a self-help journey. This is an undoing. Undoing the false beliefs that kept you small. They talk of careers, followers, new gadgets, new diets, new relationships, all with such urgency, such sincerity. You try to join in, but your voice echoes in your throat. It's like reciting lines in a play you no longer believe in. You once admired people for how successful they were within the system. Now you admire those who dare to step outside it. There is no single word for this feeling. It is not rebellion, nor sadness, nor awakening. It is all of them. Undoing the inherited shame that kept you silent. Undoing the cultural hypnosis that told you suffering is noble if it's productive. You begin by creating interruptions. Instead of numbing yourself with noise, you sit in silence. Instead of outsourcing your worth, you ask who benefits from your insecurity. Instead of chasing another distraction, you ask, what am I afraid to feel if I stop? This rebellion is not about violence. It's about truth. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. You begin to notice things others overlook. The hollowness in success, the performative empathy in politics, the commodification of healing, the sanitized spirituality sold in pastel tones. You see how rebellion itself has been packaged into brands, into aesthetics, into consumption. But real rebellion is ugly, lonely, sacred. It doesn't look good on Instagram because it's not about looking different. It's about being different. And to be different, you must start by facing the thing most people spend their lives avoiding, yourself. Schopenhauer said, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." True freedom begins not in action, but in the awareness of what has shaped your will. What desires are yours? Which fears were planted in you? Which dreams are masks? To break free, you must interrogate everything, especially the things that feel safest. This is why few complete the rebellion, because freedom costs everything you built in your sleep. And yet, what if on the other side of that destruction is not emptiness, but space? Space to feel, space to imagine, space to be. History is full of those who walked away, who defied the roles handed to them. Buddha walked out of his palace. Jesus walked into the desert. Socrates drank the hemlock. Simone Weil chose factory work over comfort. Thoreau went into the woods. These were not escapes. They were returnings. Returnings to something deeper than identity, deeper than culture, deeper than language. You do not have to become them, but you can follow their courage. And courage doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to speak when everyone else is shouting. Sometimes it looks like crying in your car after quitting a job that killed your spirit. Sometimes it looks like planting a seed no one else believes in. The rebellion is not one grand act. It is 1,000 small acts of devotion to the truth of your being. And here's the secret they never told you. When you finally stop pretending, when you let your soul lead, the world you feared would reject you begins to change. Not because it suddenly approves of you, but because you're no longer asking it to. The cage never disappears. You simply outgrow it. And when you walk past its broken bars, you don't just free yourself. You become a lighthouse for others still asleep. Your presence becomes permission. Your rebellion becomes medicine. Your freedom becomes contagious. So if you're waiting for a sign, this is it. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the ache no longer feels like pain. It feels like truth. Not the kind of truth found in books or sermons or algorithms, but the kind that lives in your bones. The kind you were born with. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't prove, doesn't plead. It just is. You wake up one morning and the question has changed. It's no longer, what's wrong with me, but rather, what else have I forgotten? Because now you know, the soul never outgrew the world. The world simply forgot how to grow with the soul. And that is the final paradox. You were never too much. You were never broken. You were simply remembering a version of yourself that the world could not yet hold. You don't need fixing. You don't need more steps. You don't need another reason to be worthy. You just need space. Space to become. Space to burn. Space to begin again. The soul does not follow straight lines. It spirals. It returns to old wounds with new eyes. It peels away layers, not to arrive at a destination, but to remember itself beneath the noise. You are not here to win a game. You are not here to impress the asleep. You are not here to decorate a cage and call it freedom. You are here to wake up, to tear down illusions with tenderness, to weep for everything you once had to forget, to meet your own gaze in the mirror and whisper, "I see you." You are here to become so deeply yourself that the world begins to bend, subtly, silently, toward something more real, more whole. That is the revolution. But here is the hardest truth. When the soul outgrows the world, it's not the world that changes first. It's you. You stop waiting for external permission to live internally free. You stop looking for applause for the things that cost you everything. It is the strange, secret grief of no longer belonging to the life you once fought to build. It is the soul knocking on the walls of the known, not to escape, but because it remembers something vast, infinite, forgotten. And so, you begin to ask questions, terrifying, luminous questions. What happens when the soul outgrows the world? What happens when your inner truth no longer fits within your outer life? What if the world is not built for souls, but for roles? You stop seeking company for every step of the journey, because some awakenings are meant to be walked alone. This is the ultimate realization. You are the world. You are not separate from it, not beneath it, not above it. You are its pulse, its mirror, its unspoken dream. And when you heal, something in the world heals with you. When you rebel, something in the world awakens. When you expand, you drag the cosmos with you. Every insight, every act of courage, every moment you refuse to betray your soul ripples outward, not through noise, but through resonance. This is not metaphor. This is physics of the spirit. You are not a mistake of biology. You are an unfolding mystery of consciousness. And every time you sit in stillness, every time you refuse to perform, every time you choose authenticity over approval, you rewire the collective nervous system of humanity. You don't need a movement. You are the movement. You don't need a label. You are the language. You don't need a map. You are the way. So stop asking if it's too late. It begins now. In this breath. In this tear. In this sacred, defiant smile. The soul has never been afraid. It is the mind that trembles, the ego that resists, the body that remembers too many years of pretending. But the soul? The soul is a wildfire wrapped in soft skin. It is the place where eternity touches time. And now, finally, after years of containment, it is waking up. You will not be understood by everyone. That is the price of remembrance. But you will recognize others by the light in their eyes, the quiet rebellion in their silence, the tremble in their truth-telling, the way they hold space without needing to fix you. And when your paths cross, there will be no need for small talk, only presence, only truth, only this. I see you, and I remember too, because all along, your soul was not outgrowing the world. It was calling it home. And perhaps, just perhaps, your ache was never a curse. It was the doorway. It was the invitation. It was the holy fire burning away everything that was never truly yours. So now, as you stand in the ashes of your old life, tender, real, luminous, ask yourself not, "What do I do next?" Ask instead, "What is finally ready to be born through me?" Because the soul is not interested in safety, it is interested in truth. And truth that will make you wild. And what if the discomfort you feel is not a problem to fix, but a signal to follow? These questions are not easy to hold. They unravel things. They make people uncomfortable. They force you to look at everything, not just outside, but inside, with brutal honesty. What if the education you received was not designed to expand your mind, but to confine it? What if the job you worked so hard for is actually a distraction from your real work? What if your loneliness is not a symptom of failure, but evidence that your soul is calling you elsewhere? We have been taught to adapt, to be grateful, to not ask for too much. But what if your soul is too large for small gratitude? What if it doesn't want comfort or applause, but truth? This is the paradox. The more awake you become, the more unfit you feel for the world you were born into. Not because there is something wrong with you, but because there is something too right. You are not broken. You are just expanding. And yet, there is no clear map for this path. No guaranteed safety. No applause for leaving the stage. Only silence and stars, and a sense, vague but undeniable, that something sacred awaits on the other side of this rupture. This is not a crisis. It is a metamorphosis. But first, the cocoon must crack. The world will tell you to shrink back, to return to familiar roles, to numb the ache, to smile and perform. But your soul? It won't stop growing. It never will. And one day, it will outgrow your fear too. The only question is, will you follow it? Because if you do, nothing will ever be the same again. You were never taught what to do when your soul grows too large for the stories you inherited. Instead, you were taught to adjust, to measure your life by the metrics of others, to fit in, perform, obey, improve, but never to outgrow. Growth in our world is permitted only in socially sanctioned directions. Climb the ladder, collect degrees, accumulate praise.